Okay, so this is the Economic Development Commission meeting of March 3rd. It's 8:33 a.m. We have Mark Barnhart, Director of Economic Community Development. We have Vice Chair Steve Rosado, Ken Hockhauser, Justin Beck, Matt Rappaport, Colin Colburn, and Gretchen Gerthner, our recording secretary, as well as Don Peterson, Commissioner Emeritus. Mr. Vice Chair, would you like to call the meeting to order at the time?
Please, and I guess first order of business is vote on minutes from last week.
Yep.
Is there a motion to accept the meeting minutes?
It's the meeting of February 3rd, right?
Yep.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay. Well, I just have a couple things to report today. So we're in the midst of a couple of, well, we have the ongoing retail initiative. Our Buy Local Bingo program runs through the end of this week. Basically, the whole point is to encourage people to frequent and patronize local businesses, whether those are shops and restaurants. If you make bingo on one or two game cards, you turn it in with your receipts. You can win some prizes. So that runs through the end of the week, as I indicated. The next event on our calendar is the Shop and Stroll into Spring event at the end of April. We're working with the downtown merchants to organize that event. We're also partnering with the Fairfield Fund for Education to raise monies for that organization, which supports our local school system and teachers, and providing some additional funding assistance to run programs, enrichment programs and the like that may not be covered by the local budget process. So that event is at the end of April, and Mary Alice is working with JB Percival and the Fairfield Fund for Education to have a pre-event as part of that program. I know we had some time, and Justin, you were very interested in talking about some signature events. We did have a meeting earlier this week with the Friends for the Fairfield Public Library and the Parks and Rec Department, as well as the First Select Woman's Office. The Friends for the Public Library have run a Fairfield Food Truck Festival in the fall down at the beach for the last several years as a fundraiser. Rather than creating new events out of whole cloth, my recommendation to the First Select Woman's Office is to build on existing events, and perhaps we can make them bigger and better. Certainly by bringing in some local some entertainment as part of that. They have had some family-friendly activities as part of their previous efforts, but we're always kind of constrained in terms of taking the risk to bring in a headline music act or something along those lines, because it's obviously weather dependent, and they don't want to put things at risk because it's a fundraiser. So the town's through the Parks and Rec Department has kind of taken that on. So we're building off that event. We also did talk about some broader programs, whether we could do either host some of these events that have been held elsewhere, and sometimes looking for new host communities like Chowderfest, or we've certainly been host to the Fairfield Irish Festival, but also talked about whether or not we would create the Taste of Fairfield event. That might be something looking towards next year, but it's definitely on the radar. So I'll keep you posted, Justin. I know that you did talk to the Parks and Rec Commission, their consultant as part of their 5-year or their master planning effort. Did meet earlier this week, although I don't see him on the call with Rob Valerie about his idea to look at whether or not we could incorporate restaurant or some kind of dining option at the marina or at the beach. So that's something too we'll report on in the future. There are a couple other things I wanted to note. There was recently a funding request for funding proposals or a funding announcement from the Office of Brownfield Redevelopment. So there are monies available for brownfield sites. This is assessment only, which typically we have a fairly good handle on the assessment piece. It's really looking for ways to, if there's any potential funding opportunity, it's really looking at the remediation component, whether that can be supported by future development plans. So we are looking at the old Miller Volkswagen site at 355 Kings Highway. There are a host of issues there, including remediation issues related to some PCB contamination on site, which has been pretty well documented, but it's also within the floodplain from the adjoining Rooster River. And the site, in order to remediate the site, there's discussion about putting in an engineer control system or CAP, which would elevate the site to some degree, and whether or not we could do that in a way that would hopefully kill two birds with one stone, bring it out of the flood elevation high enough that it would require no longer require flood compliance, but also remediate the site and prepare it for development. So we're talking to DEP and the prospective purchaser about organizing a meeting to resolve some of these issues, and the fact that there's some available funding for brownfield remediation might be of help as well. And the other thing I just wanted to mention is the outdoor dining. We do have a tentative hearing date for our text amendment, which is the 22nd of March. So I'll keep you posted, but in the meantime, there is a raised bill before the General Assembly, 5271. There's a public hearing on Friday, which I'll provide some written testimony. Basically, it would extend the existing provisions to temporary accommodations that have been made to facilitate outdoor dining during the pandemic for another year through next spring. So I think that would be helpful for us. We've gotten a number of phone calls recently from restaurants as to how we're going to handle this. By the time we put in place, assuming that we get a favorable review from planning and zoning to our proposed text amendment, we may be looking at May implementation date, which again, to give some certainty for restaurants to make some plans, I think would be helpful. So certainly, I think it's a good thing if we can continue with the existing framework. In the meantime, hopefully get our public hearing on the 22nd completed and a favorable review from planning and zoning to make the changes that we've requested. In the meantime, I'll be sending that out to the restaurant community to make sure they're cognizant of both of these things. So I don't know if there are any questions on any of those issues that I raised. I did want to give a shout out to Colin Colburn. I met with him with Mary Alice earlier this week to review some of the software he has at his disposal. We identified about 24 companies that are actively in the market within the next year looking for office space that are in the New York metro area, that are in employ less than 50 people at those office locations and are knowledge-based fields that might be good targets for us to at least put Fairfield on their radar screen as an option. So we're working to flush out that list a little bit more, but I wanted to thank Colin for his help in that. And I'll certainly be talking. I see Ken's in my screen, so I'll be certainly talking to Ken as well to get his input into that process, given his years of experience and expertise in this area. So
Appreciate that.
I'll pause there to see if there's any questions on anything else I mentioned in my monologue in the first couple minutes here. Anything coming up? So the three things I took away from the Economic Development Summit, I had Rob. Rob really is passionate about, looking at waterfront dining, taking advantage of some of our facilities on on the waterfront, whether we could incorporate a restaurant as part of that. I suggested to him when I met with him earlier this week that this might be a good project for partnering with one or both of the local universities to do a market and feasibility analysis and to develop a business plan around it, just to have a better understanding of what the cost, investment, what the market looks like, how feasible is it, do that full analysis. We've done something similar to that for the community theater space and the Burr Homestead. So I think this is within their capacity and wheelhouse to do something like that. It might even create some type of competition around it with some prize money if people come up with some a great plan. But I think that may help move the process forward, assuming that Parks and Rec, the commission, is receptive to the idea. At least that's something that we might bring some value added, something to the table in terms of assessing the feasibility and then determining what the cost and potential ROI might be to the town if we were to do something like that. So that's one thing. The signature event, again, I mentioned earlier, but looking at a Taste of Fairfield event probably will require a little bit more time. But in the meantime, we might be able to build on some of the existing programs and events we've had working with groups like the Fairfield Friends for Public Library. And then the last thing is the marketing and business attraction component, which a number of you expressed interest in. And Colin and Ken, I think, would probably be taking the lead on this. I guess that's the third thing. The fourth thing would be the planning and zoning, the POCD, which we're still waiting for. We've identified the company that we would like to work with, and we're just working through the process of getting the purchasing department to award the contract. I think it requires the Board of Selectmen to vote on it. But again, I think that was something, Matt, you had expressed interested in terms of, kind of making sure that EDC is plugged into that process and integrated into their planning. So keep all of you posted on all that. Any comments or reactions? I think that was what I took away from the summit in terms of the ideas that you guys brought to the table.
I think it's a lot, and I think definitely newer and fresh ideas that we hadn't had in the last couple of years. So thank you for keeping us organized and on task.
Okay. So the only other thing, Bev is not here today because she's taking a well-deserved vacation to Florida. So we won't have a report from the chamber. I think, I know Colin was at the Economic Outlook breakfast this past month with John Trainer from People's Bank was the keynote. We had Brenda, our first selectwoman, also delivered some remarks. I don't know if I missed anyone else that was there. I just didn't see because we did have a pretty good attendance at the event. But Colin, I don't know if you had any thoughts on that from your perspective.
No, it was I think it was my first business event since the pandemic, which was nice. It was great turnout, I thought, and it was really interesting to hear John and his sort of macro economic outlook and translating that into what that means for the state and the town. And there was lots of good pros, but also lots of headwinds that he talked about, specifically things like inflation.
Oh, Colin just
dropped out,
but he'll be back.
Sorry, you can hear me now?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, sorry about that. Don't know what happened. No, but I thought it was very insightful and very good to hear that from the macro lens.
I will, the only other thing I will mention, there are a couple things that are on our radar in terms of development applications. One, I think, which is certainly good news for all of you who've been following the saga of this site, the former plant factory site, 4185 Black Rock Turnpike. It was approved originally for a 25,000 square foot medical office. This is across from the Motel Hi-Ho. It was a nursery, a plant nursery for many years. It's a much bigger site than what this proposal's looking at, but this is focused on the couple acres that immediately abuts Black Rock Turnpike. There's a big piece of real estate, probably 15 acres or so, up on top of the rock pile, if you will, where there's a number of wetlands up there. So it's not only challenging topography to get access to, but then when you get up on the site, you have to deal with wetlands and regulated areas, vernal pools and all the like. So, you know, it's a little bit of a dicey proposition from a development standpoint, but we've had other people take runs at it. But in terms of the plant factory site itself, the couple acres, it was approved for a 25,000 square foot medical office. Then the developer, owner of the property, I guess that the interest in developing the site for that purpose was tepid or evaporated, and he came back with a set aside an application under Connecticut General Statute 830G for a 94 unit set aside development residential on that piece, which was approved. There was an appeal taken by well, the front group was the Merritt Conservancy, was concerned about the visual impact on the adjoining Merritt Parkway, but I suspect there may be other folks involved in financing that appeal. And in the meantime, interest in looking at the site once more for medical office increased, and so he came back fairly recently with an application for facade changes, which the Planning and Zoning Commission eagerly embraced. And so my understanding is now they're moving ahead with developing that site for medical office under the prior approval in lieu of the 94 unit residential development that was also approved for that site, which was under appeal. So make a long story short, that site looks like it'll be medical office in the near future. And time was of the essence, so I suspect that they will be moving quickly to complete their financing, construction drawings, and getting started with construction, hopefully later this year. So that's good news. A couple other things that I'll call to your attention. We just concluded a public hearing with Sacred Heart University under Planning and Zoning for several new residential dormitories. It's actually one building. Well, it's two buildings connected that comprise about 134,000 square feet. Provides 484 beds. It's freshman housing. Was part of the upper quad, proposed upper quad enhancements when they acquired the Jewish home for the elderly site. This was part of their long-term vision and plans for that acquisition, that piece, to build additional dormitory housing to meet rising enrollment, which is a good thing. So the Planning and Zoning Commission did complete their public hearing. I'm sure you may have read a couple news accounts regarding it. There was some neighborhood opposition to it, and I think the Planning and Zoning Commission now has it on their docket for next week to consider, whether or not to move forward with that application or to approve that application. Not to be outdone, Fairfield University has a proposal to expand some additional housing themselves. These are townhome style units that they're looking to develop, 84 beds, so it's relatively modest in size, but they have a similar development for senior housing. I think this is also upperclassmen housing on their site, which we may be sharing the public hearing docket for on the 22nd. Potentially, they have filed an application, so it's awaiting a public hearing. The other one I will note is We just had a code review for a proposed addition to the Lennox Jewelers facility, a very small, like a 2,000 square foot addition, but addition nonetheless. Lennox Jewelers purchased the property at 2,500 Black Rock Turnpike, which is on the upper end of next to White Birch Plaza. That they just completed their code review, so it'll take some time for them to finalize. Well, hopefully not too much, but to finalize their application to planning and zoning. The other things that are before planning and zoning and inland wetlands currently are residential. So there's a 26 unit development at on Beacon Square, which is the subject of public hearing next week before planning and zoning. I'm sure you may have read that there's also an application pending before the Inland Wetlands Commission for a much larger residential development on the upper reaches of Black Rock Turnpike. This is 4480, which is also pretty sizable residential developments. A tough site from a topography standpoint, but they're again looking to move forward with that. And that hearing, I believe, is currently underway or will be scheduled shortly. So that's it in terms of development rundown. I think we started in terms of our bigger sites. I mentioned the Miller Volkswagen site. We have had conversations with the developer, purchaser for the Fairfield Metro Center, crossings at Fairfield Metro Center. He hasn't yet closed on the property. He's still in that due diligence period, awaiting. Basically, what we're waiting now is the assignment, consent to the assignment from both the state and the town. The town has signaled its willingness. The state has done so as well. So I don't think there's an issue with it. It's really just we have a bunch of lawyers that are now working on the exact form that it has to take, and it'll need to be reviewed by the AG's office. So these things take a little bit of time, but that will be necessary. He'll obviously have to get this sorted out in order to close on the property, and have to close on the property before he can file a building permit, which had been his initial plan under the existing approval to move forward with construction of the first residential building as part of the overall development plan for that site, and then come in with a revised master plan application. For those of you who tuned into Brenda's State of the Town, it was something that she referenced, that she was pleased that the project was moving forward, but there are a couple dominoes that still need to fall there in order for that to take effect.
Just a question, I listen to the news, hearing some politicians or people running for office talking about the 830G. Is that up for like any sort of revisions on the state level?
Not really. There's actually a hearing today. There's a bill pending that basically proposes that they study. The General Assembly has set up a committee to study the effects of 830G. So I believe the first selectwoman will present some written testimony, just talking about our experiences with 830G, but there are no real meaningful substantive changes that are being proposed that have, I'm sure there are some bills that have been proposed, but they have no chance of actually seeing the light of day, I don't think, this year.
Is there a threshold, or are we close to that threshold, if there is one, in terms of qualifying and meeting those thresholds? So any further development can not have to go down that road?
Yeah, so there is a provision in 830G that allows communities to apply for and receive a temporary moratorium, which is a 4-year moratorium, which precludes most but not all applications made pursuant to 830G. It pretty much covers or exempts communities from applications made by private developers under 830G. It does allow some assisted developments to go forward under those provisions, like those proposed by the Housing Authority. In order to qualify, there are a number of steps needed, but the threshold is based on 2% of the last 2% of the housing units based on the last decennial census. So we're still operating under the 2010 census numbers, which we have 21,648 housing units here in town. So 2% of that is 433. So we need 433 points under the formula that the state has created under 830G. And we're about 50 points short right now. So we've made a lot of progress in the last several years, but we're still about 50 points short of meeting the bare minimum threshold. And I'd like to be a little bit, give ourselves a little bit of wiggle room, because the process is, once you think you've achieved enough points to qualify, then you have to issue a public notice that you intend to make an application. It's kind of a last call for developers to submit applications, because if they get it in before the moratorium is granted, they're not covered by it. So that there's a public notice provision that has to be met. And then the application is made, and the state will then review the information you provide to determine whether or not they agree with your point calculations. So there's always a possibility that you may think that a development produces yields a certain number of points, and the state disagrees with that. So again, I'd like to give ourselves a little bit of cushion, but even, and the process sometimes gets a little bit, as you can imagine, a little bit political in terms of, disagreements over that. I know that happened with one of our adjoining communities, where it ended up getting booted to the AG's office to make to adjudicate who was right in terms of the point and whether something qualified or not. So we're close. We're close. The problem that I see is I don't see enough in the pipeline that's going to get us there this year. It looks like 2023 is more realistic based on where we are with some of these projects. They have to be either built or newly deed restricted after July 1, 1990 to count towards our moratorium points. And they have to be deed restricted for a period of not less than 40 years. So we do have projects that we assist other ways that have deed restrictions of less than 40 years, or that predate the 1990 cutoff. So
Mark, I have to
that's a
presume, like,
long-winded response. We're close, but not there yet.
any new applications that come in, there obviously would be better than 2% and whatever the affordable housing they're including, because otherwise you're sort of moving the goal line. Like if they only have 1% and they're adding, more points on the unaffordable housing.
Yeah, the issue that we'll have, I mean, it's really, I don't see, for most communities in the state, to achieve 10%, which is the threshold required to exempt yourself permanently from 830G. I don't see that as a realistic option, because we're at roughly 3% now, 2.8%. To get there, if you're doing projects under 830G, I think it would, at 30% affordable and 70% market rate, it would require 5,000-6,000 housing units in town, which it's just ridiculous based on the number of development sites we have and the housing units we already have. It's just not a realistic option. So the moratorium is probably our best scenario right now, just to give ourselves a little bit of breathing room. And that's where we've been focusing our attention at this point.
Mark, I know obviously it depends how many other units are built, but do you have a number of affordable units? If only affordable units were built going forward, how many we would need to get those 50 points?
The 50 points, we have two projects that are, a good sized project. If the housing authority were to move forward on any of their 980 High Street's been in litigation based on an inland wetlands denial. That project by itself would qualify. Now, we do have two projects now that are going to be the combined total between them, 78 Umpqua, which is under construction, and 528 Black Rock Turnpike. Both are pretty small developments, but the combined total of those will put us very close to that 50 mark. So we probably need a good sized project, 50 plus units that, or, where you have the housing authority is doing largely, 80 to 90 or 100% affordable. So any of those, that combination would get us over the hump.
So we're close.
We're very close. It's just not close enough. I wish it were 2022. The other thing that's going to happen, as I mentioned, the current goal line is based on a formula calculated on the 2010 census. Obviously, we're waiting for the 2020 census numbers to be released. Once that happens, that'll reset the formula, and we'll conceivably move the goalpost a little further away. There's also some amendments that were made to 830G back in 2017 when Brenda Kupchak was a member of the state legislature. Some of those provisions sunset this year. And I brought that to the attention of our legislative delegation, but to the question posed by Steve earlier, they told me it's a short session to begin with, and there's just no appetite to take any of these meaningful measures up at this point to revise 830G. So again, that will have a small but modest impact on the number of points that we currently have in our portfolio. Again, effect of that will move it a little bit further away. That's why the two projects that I mentioned, Black Rock Turnpike and Umpqua, with those two other changes taking place, I don't think we're going to be enough to close the gap. So we need something else. And when you do construction, it's an 18-month construction. So at least, so if something's not in the ground right now, you only get the points once things are CO'd. So you can just run the numbers out. You can do that projection. You can see that we're not going to get there in 2022 for sure. 2023, again, we need something to, move forward pretty quickly here to help us get over the hump.
Thanks.
Other questions on anything else? Mr. Chair, back to you.
I guess other business or meeting adjournment.
Yeah, we're largely there. The only other thing I've got to report, I think those of you who were working on a couple projects where we're providing some grant support and doing business outreach, both in the Stratfield section and Southport. Both are pedestrian oriented improvements. Stratfield Four Corners and Southport along the Post Road. Both those projects are pretty close to being completed, but we're working with a couple, in both cases, one business owner that has a minor encroachment on the state right of way. Either we need to resolve the encroachment issue so that they're not in the state right of way, or they lease property from the state so that the encroachment is legal. And in both cases, they're using the state right of way for parking for their patrons or customers. And so I have a meeting later today with one of the business owners to try to work out that issue. But that's the only other thing that we're trying to aggressively move forward on so we can get these things under construction later this year.
I guess if there's nothing else, a motion to adjourn.
Don't all speak at once.
Someone just has
You
to.
just have a perpetual motion.
All right, so I guess meeting adjourned. Thank you, Mark, for a lot of updated information, a lot of activity. Nothing exciting, but all good.
All right. Thank you, guys. Appreciate your
All
time.
right.
Thank you,
Have a
Mark.
good day.
Thanks,
Thanks.
everyone.
Right.
Bye.